But I remember standing there just looking around, and there was nobody around for 5 miles for a reason. This is a bomb that we're about to get on.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the TruthWorks podcast. I have lots of exciting news to share today. First, I'm going to get into, I have a guest co-host today because my partner in crime, Patty McCord, is on a trip with her kids. And so I asked my wonderful, great friend, Nellie Prushkov, to come join me today. And she is the CHRO of Reddit, but how Nellie and I know each other is we work together at Netflix. And so welcome, Nellie.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. So excited, especially for this interview.
I know. I didn't want to do this interview by myself because I don't know. I'm a little nervous and starstruck. We have Dr. Bernard Harris, who was the first African-American astronaut to walk in space, which I don't even know what walking in space must feel like. Or, I mean, I don't know. We're going to get into it. But Dr. Harris is a doctor, a physician, went to medical school, but has become an astronaut. He's written this amazing book called Embracing Infinite Possibilities, Letting Go of Fear to Find Your Highest Potential. And we talk a lot about letting go of fear on the show and reaching your potential. So I'm so excited to talk to you about your book. And then, Dr. Harris, you have exciting news. What is going to happen in May? Tell us.
I am going to be inducted into the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame at the end of May.
Congratulations.
Oh, congratulations. I don't know. I'm getting goosebumps. We're talking to an astronaut, Nellie.
Yes, and not just any astronaut, the first African-American to walk in space, being conducted in the Hall of Fame. I mean, so many achievements. What haven't you achieved, Dr. Harris?
Yes. What haven't you done? Tell us the astronaut story.
So I was one of those kids that was fascinated with science and science fiction. I used to read science fiction books. I like to tell people, one of the original Star Trekkers. Star Trek came out during the time in which I was growing up. And so that was all the fantasy side. But at the same time, the U.S. and Russia were locked in a battle to see who was going to get to the moon first. And
Right.
so I watched that on my little black and white television. And in 1969, I was 13 years old when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. And I said, you know what? I think I want to
That's going to
be
be
an
me.
astronaut. Yeah, that's how it started.
And what did you do from that point forward once you sort of had that aha or epiphany of?
Well, I was lucky enough to have a mother who was an educator who would always ask us, what do you want to do when you grow up? Always pushing that for us, getting us to think into the future. And in my household, it wasn't, when you were going to finish high school, it's when you're going to finish college or what college, it was just given. So we had no choice from that standpoint. And so I remember running to her one day and I said, Mom, I know what I want to do. I want to be an astronaut. And she said, oh, that's nice. And started to walk away.
Yeah,
how we do with our kids.
That's a good idea, baby.
They come with all these ideas and you kind of go, oh, yeah. And then suddenly she turns around, realized how important her words were to me. And she turned around and said that I could be and do anything that I wanted to be, which is probably the first advice and the best advice I've ever gotten. Was that enabled me to think bigger than what I might have, otherwise. And so in high school, I had to figure out not only what college I was going to go to, but what major. And in my research at NASA, I found out that there were doctors who worked in the space program. And I realized that I like helping people. So even if I didn't go into space, I like this idea of being a physician. And now I found out that there were physicians that could go into space. And so went to the University of Houston as an undergraduate school, Texas Tech Medical School, Mayo Clinic for my internal medicine training. And then I ended up doing a fellowship at NASA Ames Research Center out in California. And that was my, foothold into NASA.
Yeah.
And then eventually after that. So when I finished up my residency at the Mayo Clinic, and by the way, the Mayo Clinic, unbeknownst to me when I went there, was involved in the early space program. So I always like to tell the story. I'm sitting at lunch with my physician leader and the professor, and he's asking us kids, these residents, what do you want to do after you finish your residency? And I said, I think I want to be an astronaut. Because I didn't want to be laughed at, right?
Yeah, right.
And he got all excited about it. He goes, did you know that we have an aerospace medicine department? I said, no, I didn't, because I was there for internal medicine. So I went to the aerospace medicine department, and the head of that program liked my story so much that he literally told me to stop almost like mid-sentence, picks up the phone, calls the head of NASA and says, I got this kid who says that he wants to be an astronaut. What should he do? You talk about mentorship and how important that is. And from that conversation, I set out on the course. He said, tell him, if he's really interested, given his background, to find the biggest problem that NASA has with human beings being in space and see if he can be a part of that solution. And so that's exactly what I did. At the time, when I studied NASA, it was bone loss. We lose 1% of bone per month in space because of microgravity. Being in a place that doesn't have gravity, our body adapts to that microgravity environment. We lose muscle, bone, our heart gets smaller. We call that space medicine, space adaptation syndrome, a body's ability to adapt.
Right.
And so I chose to become an expert on the bone side, and I started my research career at Ames Research Center, and then eventually moved to Johnson Space Center. And then in 1990, applied to the astronaut corps and came into the astronaut corps of the 13th class in the astronaut corps.
Wow. That's amazing.
Absolutely inspiring. You also make it sound somewhat easy, which I'm sure it wasn't. And you were through that education process. Have you ever second guessed your dreams, your goals, whether or not you can do it?
Oh, yeah. Where do you want me to start?
Yeah. Tell us everything.
So from the first start, okay, so let me back with the aspiration. 1969 was shortly after the civil rights movement. And so as a Black kid looking at NASA, I didn't see anybody who looked like me, right? And even if you were a girl, there were no girls. The right stuff were, white guys, right?
Yeah.
They were fighter pilots, right? Unbeknownst to me, as we now know, that there were minorities and women working behind the scenes. They just weren't in front of the camera. But I didn't know that. So I didn't see anybody look like me. So I first had to overcome that notion that, well, maybe they don't want Black folks in space, right? And of course, that's not true. And things certainly changed some years later when in my class, when you look at our class, we're probably one of the most integrated class, diverse class at NASA. And that was the 13th class. So several years later. So that was probably the first. And then in college, it was the difficulty in getting into medical school, right? Because everybody comes to college wanting to be a doctor and get in the pre-med program, and then they take organic chemistry. And I see you're laughing, so you probably relate that organic chemistry is one of the hardest
And that's
courses.
why we did not become astronauts.
Yeah, no. Or doctors.
So you have to go through that gauntlet. And then in medical school, I remember, I'll share this story with you. I was really frustrated. We had been working up, and I was up all night. We were working on this patient, and I called up my brother. He called me, and I said, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it. This is really, I'm tired, and this is hard work and all that sort of thing. And you know what he said to me? He said, well, you wanted to be a doctor. I went, that was not exactly what I was looking for.
Right. You wanted it. So what are you complaining about?
So it's so like, okay, I got a good kick in the butt. And I said, okay, he's right.
Keep an eye on the prize.
He
Yeah.
reminded me of what my goal was.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we get in the midst of struggles like this and challenges like this, we get depressed, or we may think that this is not for us. And my advice is to press on, to remember what your goal and what your dream, to focus on that during those times. And I'm a perfect example of, if you do that, if you have that stick-to-itiveness and have that resilience, that you can accomplish anything that you want to do in life.
I totally agree. Okay, so you get into the 13th class and you go to astronaut school. What was that like?
So we spent about a year or two in basic training. At that point, we're called astronaut candidates. We're not astronauts yet, because we've got to go through this gauntlet. Different than the military, we don't have like physical things that we have to do, run 5 miles or do all of this sort of thing. It's more mental than anything else. We are in class mostly learning things like geology and engineering, and if those who don't have medical background, doing medicine. And then we go through the survival schools, so land, water, and coal survival training. And all of this is to prepare us for an environment that we yet to experience. And speaking of that environment, the only way we can simulate different aspects of weightlessness of life in space is that we have a water tank, a huge water tank in Houston, where we will put on a space suit and we'll go underwater and we'll practice doing spacewalks. Or we learn how to dive, because that's teaming. And then more importantly, we learn how to fly. So those of us who are not pilots, I was a pilot coming in,
So you
learn how to fly.
You had flown before.
I had flown. I was a private pilot before I joined NASA. And then we go through what's called a T-38 ground school and flight school, and then learn how to fly the shuttle. So all of that takes some time. And this is just to become an astronaut, right?
Right.
That's the basics for the mission.
Right.
And for every mission that we are selected to, we spend 1 to 2 and sometimes 3 years in preparation for that mission.
Whoa.
Wow. So you learn how you're astronaut candidate, you go through, you become an astronaut, and then you get chosen for this mission. What are you feeling? What are you thinking?
I'm excited, right? Because this is something that I've always wanted to do, right?
Right.
So once we go through that basic training, so you want to know what it's like, the first mission.
Were you scared at all?
No, I wasn't scared on that part. Let me tell you, can I share with you the part that I was a little scared on? And that is the blast off.
Yeah.
So you spend 2 to 3 years, as I said, learning that mission, getting prepared as a team. Usually in my day, I flew the space shuttle. And many people have seen the space shuttle, but you may not know that it weighs 5 million pounds. In order to get that 5 million pounds into the air, you have to light 5 engines that produce a thrust of 7.5 million pounds. And when those engines light, you basically get catapulted off the planet. But let me back up to your question. When did I get nervous? When we went out to the launch pad and we got into the elevator, and the elevator went up to about the 100-foot level or so, where the gantry is that we walk across to go into the space shuttle. And as I was standing there, because we were taking turns, there were suit technicians helping us get into our seat. Because remember, the space ship is on its tail. So when we sit down, we're actually on our backs.
Right.
So you have to crawl in and get on your back. You need help getting that. But I remember standing there just looking around the launch site. and there was nobody around for 5 miles for a reason. This is
Right.
a bomb that we're
Yeah.
about to get on. Right?
And that you're about to get into. Yeah.
Yeah.
That I'm about to get into. So I was okay. It was like, well, that's cool. Interesting. And I'm taking
Yeah.
my first flight now. So then it's my turn to get in the seat and they get us all in. It takes about 2 hours to get us all saved. But I remember sitting there buckled up. And when they closed the hatch, you had this metal clang and then a slight pressurization of the vehicle. And I said, what am I doing? What am I doing here? You know, you
Yeah.
have
The
those,
way to get out.
that's right. Those
Wait,
instant
don't shut the
moments.
door.
It was like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I really didn't mean to do this. Anyway,
Right.
so that was one of those things, a split second you realize, well, guess what? I can't get out. They locked the door. So I'm
Yeah.
in for the ride, whatever ride. And what a ride.
I'm sure. Was it anything like you had imagined, or was it completely different?
I think the first flight, it's completely different. I mean, just think about that, all the experiences, before you could only imagine it. Then you come to NASA and train, and you get trained for different aspects of it. So you feel like you're really ready, but you can only train different aspects of the mission. And nothing puts it all together like the mission itself. So we're sitting there getting ready to lift off. You have a headset on, you're listening to mission control and launch control, getting all the systems together. And then at T-minus 2 minutes and counting, we go for what's called, they ask you to close your visor and turn on O2, which means close your visor and turn on your oxygen, right? That's when you know that everything is safe and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
At T-minus 5 seconds, the main engines of the shuttle, they begin to come to life and they roar. And that puts out about 1.5 million pounds of thrust. And the whole vehicle is just shaking. You're just sitting there, but you're not going anywhere. Because what the system is doing is checking out to make sure those 3 engines are going at top performance before they light the solid rocket motors. And when you light the solid rocket motors, they are solid rockets. Once you light them, you can't turn them off. And so you want to make sure all those systems. So that whole thing takes about 5 seconds. At T-minus 0 seconds, they light the solid rocket motors, and those kick out 6 more million pounds of thrust. And that's when you get pushed back in your seat and you just get shot into the air. So within first stage, 2 minutes of flight, that's first stage, we reach an altitude of 100,000 feet. Think about that.
That's
Going
crazy.
a mere 2,500 miles an hour. And over the course of the next 6.5 minutes, total of 8.5 minutes, we go from 2,500 to 5,000, 15,000, eventually to 17,500 miles an hour to get us safely in orbit.
Is anything going through your mind in those minutes, or are you just blanked out?
No, you're not blanking out. You're forced back to about 2.5 times your weight. So you're really heavy. And the first thing that's going to my mind is breathe, because think about that. So you're on your back, the force is going through your chest, and you have to consciously tell yourself to take a breath because it's so difficult to breathe when you're going through that. And then when that 8.5 minutes is up, that pressure is released, and it's such a liberating experience as you pop out of, as you release that pressure, and now you're in microgravity, and the things around you begin to rise up, and you realize that I'm in space, 250
Oh my
nautical
God.
miles above the Earth.
Was that magical?
Oh, it was. It was like a dream. That part of it was like a dream.
And then, how many missions have you gone on in total?
2 missions.
2 missions. And so was the second mission the walk on space?
The second one was the walk in space. Yep.
And so what was that like?
You've seen these big white suits that we wear and look like the Michelin Man. They're really
Yeah.
kind of big and white. Those are full pressure suits. So those suits allow us to go outside because you don't have any pressure whatsoever. In fact, it's a vacuum of space. It takes us about 4 hours to go through that whole process. In fact, about 6 hours if you include the 2 hours prep and then the 4 hours in the airlock, in the suit, breathing 100% oxygen. Why? because we want to get rid of the nitrogen out of our system so we won't have decompression sickness because we're getting ready to go, right? Getting ready to go outside to a lower pressure. The hatch opens up and you start floating out. And I had two sensations. One was the hatch was pointed toward the earth, and I felt like, for some reason, stepping outside the vehicle, gravity was going to pull me down, that I was falling. So I had to get over that. Again, one of those split-second things. And then the other sensation was the sheer movement as we're skirting across the atmosphere at 17,000 miles an hour. At 17,000 miles an hour, we can go around the world every 90 minutes. We get to see a sunset or sunrise every 45 minutes. It's pretty cool.
Wow.
So imagine it. So we call it a walking space, but it really is a misnomer because we're floating. We pull ourselves along in handholds, and we spent about 6 hours or so out, and it was just an amazing experience.
That is just incredible. And did you realize, like, in the moment, what a big moment that was for you, for history?
No. The short answer is no.
No. Why not?
All I want to do is make sure I didn't screw it up.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You're so focused, right? You've got mission objectives that you've got to do, and you're so focused on the things and activities that you have to carry out, not only for yourself, but, for future missions and for the scientists that are depending on you as you're doing experiments up there for them.
And after something like that, when you come back, do you experience a withdrawal? Are you thinking what's next? Like, I've accomplished the most extraordinary thing. I floated through space.
Yeah, it's a great sense of accomplishment. And I think it's more than just, the act of going into space. For me, it is realizing the fruition of a goal that I had when I was 13 years old. Right? All of that training, all of that education, all of that time has culminated into this point in time where I get to look back at Mother Earth and see the earth as what I believe how God sees the earth, right? As one people. We're earthlings.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an astronaut who's gone into space who's not come back with that great sense of belonging, that we have this precious planet that we need to take care of. And also the fact that only a few of us get a chance to do that. So it's so important for us to have conversations like this to share that experience with people here on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your life after astronaut and, the book that you've written, because I think that some of the things that you're talking about just in your own experience probably led you to write this book, but we're talking about the sense of fear. And, in your book, it's embracing infinite possibilities, but it's like letting go of the fear. And I think a lot of people I see in my career, I'm in VC now, I'm in venture capital. So I advise a lot of companies. There's just so much fear that holds people back from doing and working to their best potential. So why did you write the book, and why was that message important to you?
So I wrote my first book 10 years ago, and it was called A Dream Walker. And it was a play on my dream being fulfilled and the fact that I walked in space. So Dream Walker. I also chose that name because I actually grew up in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. And why New Mexico and Arizona? It's because my mom got a job working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I was actually raised for a large part of my early life on the Navajo Nation. And so it also is paying homage to that background, in being raised on the Native American reservation. So that Dream Walker.
I love that.
That was a book that was essentially a memoir. And what I wanted to write was the book that I just recently wrote, Embracing Impossibilities, because one of the chapters at the end of Dream Walker, I talk about the power within. So I want to talk about, the power that we all have within ourselves to do whatever it is that we want to do in life. and how there are issues and things and challenges in our environment sometimes prevent us from accomplishing our dream. So I wanted to write a book to help people. And the fear part of it is that all of us have fears, right? So all of us have fears to overcome. And when we overcome those, that's where the victory comes. So, in lies the title, Embracing Infinite Possibilities. First, helping people realize that they are infinite beings with infinite possibilities. They can do anything that they want to. They're born multi-potential, multi-talented. They are born for a reason. We are born for a reason. And when we discover that reason and fulfill that reason, that's what I consider to be ultimate success in life. But then there are challenges and obstacles and things along the way that may prevent us. And that first obstacle I remember I had to overcome was that fear of, am I enough, right? I grew up in America as a Black citizen, but I'm being told, I'm being stereotyped, so I have to first overcome that. And when I overcame that, I realized how beautiful I am, how beautiful my mind is, what contributions, that were pent up inside of me that needed to come out, and how are they to come out? So all of that's self-discovery. And as I talk about that, I'm getting actually goosebumps about talking about this,
me goosebumps.
Because it's that inner strength. It has to be developed, has to be found. It's there. We just have to discover and let it out. And sometimes those fears keep that from happening.
What's your advice to people to work through that fear?
Yeah. Spending time with yourself sounds sort of basic, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Getting to know who you are. Who are you? And I call it, some people, it's not just me, but, some philosophers have called those life questions. Who am I? Right? A question, just a simple question. One that can only be answered by you, not by your parents, not by your colleagues around you. That's why I said, find a quiet spot. The first thing is to sit back and say, who am I? And then what do I want to do? What are my natural skills? Because I've already told you that we all have them. We're born with them. We can use our brain to learn other things. What are those natural things? For those that sometimes are lost, you can go by what things are you attracted to, right? When I was growing up, this is going to really date me, there was a show called Marcus Welby, MD. It was an old show. I know you guys are too young, but it was a great show. It was about a country doctor, and he was probably the ideal image that I have of a physician. I would watch that show religiously because I was drawn to the fact that he was helping people. And that's when I discovered that I like helping people. So that was going to be in the equation. And then I've already shared with you about the fact that I love science and I love space science. And so I was drawn to that. So just think of those were natural things that nobody told me to do, but that was part of my self-discovery that I eventually put together into becoming a chief medical officer on a flight.
What did your mom say when you became an astronaut? What did she say?
You asked me about fear a few minutes ago. I have a video of my mother during the launch, and she's got her hands together. She's praying and she's crying. And I know in her head, she's going like, why did I tell him that he could do it?
Right. That's my baby.
Crazy. That's my baby. He's getting ready to go up.
So I have a 5-year-old, and I was on a business trip, and my husband let him watch The Empire Strikes Back. And so now he's like obsessed with Star Wars. When he's, 35, 40, will he be in space, do you think?
If he chooses to be, he will be. If he wants to live on the moon, he will have that opportunity to live on the moon.
You think?
Just think about that. Yes, just think about how far technology has come. Just in our lifetime, especially in my lifetime, I've seen so much. When I started, you said you're in VC. When I started, Vesalius Ventures, which is the venture capital firm that I run, again, focus on telemedicine. I had envisioned that we would be having conversations like we're having, patients would be having with the doctor, using the internet. We did not have broadband during that period of time. In order to have this conversation, we needed a dedicated T2 line, and that was a direct line that would connect between the two computers or whatever. And by the way, the computers were huge, right? They weren't small. And then I remember seeing some of the early remote monitoring technology, wearable technology. And one of our first companies had a lead that you could put on your skin to monitor your heart. And it was a wire, similar to this wire, that went to a device that hung on the side of your belt. And it sent it to this humongous electronic package that included a pager to send information to the paging system. Remember paging? Pagers?
Yeah.
We don't have those anymore.
No, I remember them.
Nellie doesn't.
911. It was everything was 911.
Yeah, when I was a doctor, we wore pagers. We didn't have cell phones. But just in the span of me starting my company, I was in 2002. 5 years, we had advanced to now having these devices, the rudiments of these devices that have changed how we deliver medicine, how we communicate with each other, and all that sort of thing in that short period of time. Facebook, social media, all those things have just come out in the last few years. 30 years from now, just think about the technology that's going to be available.
Yeah.
I get excited about that.
Well, yeah. And, everything happening with AI. I mean, AI has been around forever, as we know, but, the innovation that's happening behind it, and in 10 years, things will look much different than they do today. Similar to what happened with the internet.
Infinite possibilities.
Exactly. Infinite possibilities. But here's a caution, as we think about artificial intelligence and AI, it's big now, is sometimes we can be so much ahead from a technological standpoint in terms of making these advances, but we're not keeping up socially. So we have to make sure of that. So if you think about, there were warnings about social media and the incidence of depression in young people, right?
Yeah.
And we kind of ignored it. We didn't watch it. But now, when COVID hit, we now realize how important it is for us to be cognizant of that and protect our young people on these platforms.
Well, I think that's a very important point. So what's the thing you want to leave everybody with today?
Two things, if I can. So one is be bold. Set an audacious goal for yourself, right? You can start with one, but we have all sorts of goals as people. Sometimes we, again, will allow our fears to keep us from setting those goals because we have people around us that say that we can't do a thing, right? And as we set those goals, then have a learning mindset. That means the willingness to learn. You set that goal. What do I need to accomplish that goal? What knowledge do I need to gain? What skills do I need to gain?
Will you join us in a career confession?
Uh-oh. I think you warned me about this. Let's see.
I did, but it's easy. It's easy. You got this, doctor. You've done many, many more hard things than this. Like, this is going to be a breeze for you. Okay, so here's the question. After spending a few years after college trying to find work in my dream industry, I eventually gave up, and my hospitality job has turned into a management career that I'm starting to really enjoy. But I was recently offered an internship role within my now old dream industry, and I'm torn between giving up the ladder I've started to enjoy being on for a riskier but more creative and potentially fulfilling opportunity. Will I regret turning it down?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a good one for you, Dr. Harris.
That's a tough one. So first of all, I believe that, I'm one of those people that believe that you can do both, right? Figure out a way in which you can do both. But you have to, you have to look at this and ask yourself two questions. I believe that when we're setting goals, you ask yourself two questions. What does my head say in terms of, is this something that I enjoy doing, something I want? It sounds like both of them are things that this person wants to enjoy doing. Exploring that, looking at it again, spending time with themselves to figure out, okay, which part of this do I really like and want to be part of? And then once you decide on that, then check it with your heart. I call it the head-heart decision. Then you go inside and you check with your heart and you imagine yourself doing that thing, as I did as a kid. Imagine I want to be an astronaut. I imagined myself being an astronaut. And when I envisioned that, it felt good here. And that's when I knew. The same thing with medicine. And so check it with the head and heart.
I love that.
That's
Nellie,
beautiful.
thoughts?
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I just keep thinking about the word fear. We talked quite a bit about it today. It sounds like our listener has a passion, can't stop thinking about that industry that they wanted to work in at an early age. So what's holding them back? Probably some fear.
I love that.
Fear because they're creating, right? They put in the effort, it's paying off, they're rising up on the ladder, and walking away from that is scary. But if
Really?
fear is the only thing that's holding you back, you can work through it.
I love that too.
That's beautiful, Nellie.
Yeah.
I love it.
Both of what Dr. Harris and Nellie just said are so crucial. And I'm a big one, Dr. Harris. I always say, you got to look to your heart. And I always say, play the movie. Maybe because I worked at Netflix for too long, but like play the movie of what you believe life will look like of you doing that. And so, and work through the fear. I think that's brilliant. I want to thank you, Dr. Harris, for coming on the show. Oh my gosh. I still have goosebumps. I just talked to an astronaut on my show.
It has been fun and my pleasure to be on this program with both of you.
Okay. Well, if people want to buy the new book, where do they go?
They're offered on any of the book outlets. So Amazon, you got Barnes and Noble. Yeah, all of them carry it.
And then if people want to find out more about you and this big Hall of Fame astronaut thing. Oh, by the way, what happens when you get into the Hall of Fame of astronauts? Like, is it like a secret club that you get like a special, like what happens? Tell us.
I don't know since I'm not in it yet. So you have to bring me back to the show.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I'm going to bring you back because there's got to be like some secret password or something. There's probably like a very beautiful room behind the Pentagon somewhere that you guys get to go hang out in.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced by Megan Hayward. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.